Good afternoon. Welcome to the tea table. I am so happy you've joined me today. And we are still in the beautiful month of February, the month of looking to spring, still feeling winter, but getting those little flowers coming up around us with a promise. And I'm sitting today in my little sitting room. It's my music room, really. And I am having tea with you, and I'm playing Mozart. And there's a reason I'm playing Mozart. I'm going to show you the picture of Mozart. It's on my iPad here. Do you see Mozart? Most of you know what he looks like. He looks very much, in a way, in his costume, like our first president, George Washington, doesn't he? And there's a reason for that, because that is the same era as Mozart. And he is alive and writing music at that time of the American Revolution. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, who played the violin, met Mozart. But Thomas Jefferson loved Bach the best, but he played Mozart in a string quartet. And we think of George Washington, we think of the minuet, don't we? And the beautiful dancing, it's a French dance, and that was what they danced at the White House in those days. And his wife, of course, was Martha. And when we think of George Washington, I'm from the state of Washington, so I'm actually in the capital of the state of Washington, Olympia, Washington, and we have many commemorative statues and writings about George Washington in our beautiful state. And I'm hoping to go to show you a couple of those at a later time. There's one beautiful, beautiful statue of him praying, and it's a commemorative of him when he was in the terrible battle and went into the woods to pray, and the battle turned in the favor of the American, and that was part of the real miracle of the American Revolution. And that statue was given to our state from Washington, D.C., and there's one in Washington, D.C. and one here. And it stands in front of our old Capitol building. And I would like to take you there soon and show it to you. But for today, it's so cold, I want to stay inside. And we're just still enjoying the love and beauty of Valentine's Day. And I have a table full of roses. Hard to show you how many. But my husband brought me, he went over the top. I was so amazed. He brought me a bouquet of over 30 roses. And so I have put it in several vases. This vase is on my piano, but I took it off to show you. This vase is on my tea cart. And then I have another ruby vase on my table. I couldn't get them. My table is so crowded, I couldn't get them all on. But aren't they beautiful? There is nothing like a red rose. And for Valentine's Day, it's the ultimate. I'm very, very pleased. I'm very grateful. And I'm playing Mozart because he was playing music at the time of the president, the first president, George Washington, whose birthday we will celebrate next week. He's born the 22nd. And of course, Abraham Lincoln was born the 12th of February. And when I was a little girl, in fact, all the way through my schooling, we had 2 days off in Washington State. We had the 22nd off as George Washington's birthday, the first president, and then we had Abraham Lincoln, the 12th of February. And I researched this and discovered what happened in 1971, I believe it was. Somehow Richard Nixon made a law or put into Congress to have one day, the third Monday in February, and call it President's Day. That would commemorate George Washington's birthday, because before that time, George Washington's birthday, the 22nd of February, was a federal holiday. So they decided to simplify and put all the federal holidays on a Monday to make it nice for families to have a 3-day weekend. That's how that came about. Now, in our state, we don't celebrate Abraham Lincoln's Day anymore. We just celebrate it as President's Day. But I looked up, and there are about 20 states that still have a holiday, school day off, workers' day off for Abraham Lincoln. These two men are considered the greatest presidents, and they are considered the fathers of our country. Our founding father is George Washington, and the men that surrounded him at that era in the forming of our nation, which would be John Adams, and of course Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and James Madison, the writer of, oh my, brilliant men, and each one of them contributed. Patrick Henry, I can't list them all, but each one in himself is an amazing, brilliant, beautiful character, solid, wonderful person. And that is why we honor them, and that is why we look to them as the fathers of our country. And I was thinking, fatherhood is so beautiful. You know, in the biblical realm, in the Christian and Jewish world, we look to Abraham as our father of faith. And then we have the 12 patriarchs, who are the fathers in the Old Testament. And then in the New Testament, we have the apostles, the 12 apostles, which are considered also fathers. And then in the early church, we have what we call the early church fathers. And these are the men that, to be an early church father, you had to know one of the disciples personally. And I'll give you an example. There is a great, beautiful man named Polycarp, and he was an apostle of John. He studied under the apostle or the disciple John. And so he is considered a church father, a early church father. And then you have all through the first 3 centuries, you come up to 325, which is the Council of Nicaea, and you have the Nicene Fathers, and then you have, after that, the Ante-Nicene Fathers, which are after Nicaea. And so you have this entire collection of beautiful writings, and they are so early, and they are so original, and they are so close to the heart of the early church that they are so valuable and beautiful to read. Beautiful to read. There is one early church father, his name is Chrysostom, and he is very much honored by the Eastern Orthodox Church. However, everyone recognizes him as just a tremendous writer, and he was called the Silver Tongue because he writes and speaks so beautifully. Chrysostom. And my husband taught an early church history class once and took an evening, one of the hours of the class, just read original writings from the church fathers, read Chrysostom. You know, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. It was so moving and so beautiful the way this man wrote. Maybe I will bring something, show you some of the books. We have them in our library, the church fathers, and they're a treasure. If you ever see them available, take them, because they're getting harder to find. Everything's getting pushed online, but there's nothing like a real book, is there? No. Well, if you haven't gotten your tea yet, please pause and get your tea, and I'll be waiting for you. I brought a little purse along. This is very sweet, and this is something maybe like they would wear to their balls. Martha and George, the White House in those days was actually in New York, and right near where the Twin Towers were. And then it was moved to Washington, D.C. and built. And Thomas Jefferson had a lot to do with that also. And we will talk, I want to make this President's Talk for a couple of weeks because there's too much ground to cover. But I did bring a beautiful picture of George Washington. And I thought, I just have this hanging in my library. And it's a different picture. There's a lot of paintings of him, but this is really special. If you can see it, okay. I'm getting the light on it there. Oh, we're pulling a rose out. I guess we have to get the rose back in the vase. And this picture, it says George Washington, President of the United States. And you know, George Washington, he didn't really want to be president. After all he had done and all of the wars, he wanted to just go home to Mount Vernon and ride his horse and take care of his property. But all the people said, there's no one that can do it but you, George. And so out of duty, he became the first president. A very modest, quiet, strong, tall, handsome man. He was 6'3", and they said in any room he entered, he was tallest one generally. And it's interesting, Abraham Lincoln was very tall also. I think he was 6'4". And these men were both interesting when they were young. George Washington was the fastest runner, and they would have the two sports that they had in those days was running and wrestling. And George Washington would win every time. And interestingly enough, so did Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was the fastest with those long legs, and he was so strong because of, chopping that wood, and he won the wrestling matches. So sports, that was their sports, which goes kind of into war because that made George Washington a strong warrior. And Abraham Lincoln led a war, but he did not overtly fight in a war like George Washington, but it gave them strong character because sports is a very good discipline. And I think a good balance is, I've always thought of true education, a triangle. You have your athletics, and of course you have your academics, and you have your music and arts and fine arts. And at the center, you have God. That's perfect education. All three. And all through history, the great men were called poet warriors. A poet warrior. That's King David. He wrote songs, he played a harp, but he's an incredible athlete, incredible warrior. And so we need balance in our lives, and we need a little bit of everything. It's good when a child can have all of the experiences. Whether they become a great, great champion, just to have the discipline and understanding of what it takes to play on a team or run a race, complete it, it builds character, and it's very important. Well, I have a tea set that I think could fit right in to George Washington's White House. They had very nice things that came from France and came from England. And then, of course, we had Paul Revere, and he was a silversmith, and he made beautiful things and designed. Well, this pot, I've had this on the Tea Talk before. It has the acorn on it. And we can just think of that as a seed representing life. And that truly was George Washington. Now, I have a very, very unique cup. And I don't know if he would have ever had a cup like this. But I thought it was so special for today because it's also silver. It's actually from Turkey. And it's a little, generally they would have a very strong coffee, you know, really strong Demitasse coffee in this. But it also, in the Middle East, they have tea. And they did have very unique things in the White House. So we're going to use this. I'm going to pour out this nice, hot, brisk tea. This silver cup is lined with this little glass porcelain. You see it? And then, I think what it was for, here's a splash of milk for me. I think what it was for was because when it's cold weather and they didn't have much heat, you could put the lid on and bring the coffee and serve it, or the tea, and it would stay piping hot. Isn't that a good idea? So let's try it. Very nice. I am going to let it sit right here, and I'll have a little bit in a minute. Now, usually for George Washington's birthday, I like to make cherry tarts. And that is so delicious, or little cherry pies, cherry turnovers. But for today, I have cherry cookies. And they have a little cherry drop in them. Isn't that sweet? Can you see those? And I have them on a silver pedestal so that everyone can see them on the tea table, sitting right next to the red roses in the ruby vase. And then I have had something for a long time in my china closet, and it's from Mount Vernon. And look what it is. It's a little salt and pepper shaker. It's Martha and George. Aren't those sweet? And that is, and then, guess what? I have another set with gold, Martha and George. And I'm assuming they're from I've never been to Mount Vernon. I would love to go. We live about as far away from Mount Vernon as you could get, don't we? Now, you know, in our state, we have a little town called Mount Vernon, Washington. And then in when our state is divided by the Cascade Mountains. I live in Western Washington. If you go over Snoqualmie Pass, you go to Eastern Washington, and the big city there is Spokane. Well, on your way from here over the mountains, you go to Ellensburg, and then you're driving on I-90, you hit a little town called George. And so it's George, Washington. And it's actually at the Columbia Gorge, where they have a lot of concerts. A gorge is a natural amphitheater, and they have beautiful summer concerts there, and people can camp out, and it's been going on, used for years in many capacities. And our state is very contrasting. On the west side, where I live, the Puget Sound dominates, and it goes all through. So you have a lot of highways and roads you have to drive around to get around. If you don't take a ferry, you drive and wind around. And so we have a lot of views of water, and a lot of views, a lot of lakes and a lot of rivers. And then we have a lot of mountains, because I have Mount Rainier behind me. And then if I were to go out and look that way, I would see all of the Olympic Mountains, which also, have a Mount Washington on the top. There's a Mount Eleanor and a Mount Washington peak that people climb. So there's a lot of honor to George in our state. And the Olympics are a beautiful range that the sun sets over. And then because Mount Rainier is to the east, the sun rises over Rainier. And so we have a lot of beauty. In Seattle, there are places where you can see all of the Olympics, and you can see all of the Cascades and Rainier and the Puget Sound. Spectacular views. We're very blessed. Well, then when you go over the Cascade Mountains, and like I said, there are several passes, but the biggest pass is Snoqualmie Pass. And you go over that, and then suddenly you get to eastern Washington, and it's flat. And it's wheat fields, and then you'll have the Columbia River. You see the Columbia River, though, and that's the water there that comes down from Canada, and all the way from the Great Divide in Canada, comes down and creates Lake Roosevelt, and then comes down beautiful Columbia River where Lewis and Clark came. And then you will have also some big lakes. There's a big lake called Moses Lake, massive lake in eastern Washington. So it's not all desert, but it's very good for farming. Apples, peaches, wheat, corn, miles and miles and miles where there's no population, Whereas the west side, we have a lot of population along the I-5 corridor, the Seattle, Tacoma, Bellingham, and then Olympia, and then south of me, 200 miles, is Portland, Oregon. So, but then if I were to go extreme west of me, I would hit the Pacific Ocean. I'm just 1 hour from the Pacific Ocean. Isn't that interesting? So when you see Washington State, you always see green and evergreen. That's because there's so much rain and moisture. And so where I live is kind of the beginning of not quite the rainforest, but it's the beginning, because it seems that in West Olympia and everything west of the Capitol, to me and on, it just grows. I mean, there's so many different trees, deciduous, evergreen, fir, pine, spruce, tall trees. It's because of the water. So we have rain, but we pay a price for rain, but we have a lot of beauty because of it. So you have to pay a price for the beauty, yes. And that's probably what life is really like, there's always cause and effect. And that truly was true in George Washington's life. And he was a very deep person. He was a very solemn person, but he could have good humor, but he was serious. And, you know, the story is honest. Well, we have honest Abe, because Abe was so honest, he would never tell a lie. Well, George Washington also. That's why, you know, the story of the cherry tree, he would not tell a lie. And so George is also known for his extreme honesty. So our two greatest presidents, the character quality that really summarizes them is truth, being honest, being true. Isn't that beautiful? Because we need that. We need that in our culture today. You know, the words of Christ, the truth will set you free. Being honest and clear is the best and only way, really, to live happily. And I love studying about people like George Washington. It's interesting, you know, his parents, both of them had, his father passed first, but then his mother died, I believe, when he was 12. And he went to live with his brother Lawrence, his older brother, who was considerably older than him. But Lawrence was a good man and really an excellent example, and introduced George to the best gentlemen of the day. And George wanted to become a good man. And so he would take a little notebook and write down his, every time he would learn something, he would write it down. And I have it upstairs in my library. And as I said, I'm going to have a couple of these tea talks for the presidents. I will bring it to the next tea talk. And he would say, you know, he would have sayings that he would give himself. When I'm in a room, I will let the other person speak first, and then I will give polite comment. And he had so he had rules for himself that he made and established such beautiful character. And people began to recognize him as a real leader, a young man they could count on. And his brother helped him to choose his life work, which was surveying land. And his brother owned quite a large parcel of land. And so George spent a lot of solitary time on a horse. A surveyor, he learned he had to camp out with his horse because he was surveying massive land where there was no civilization. And it is said that that prepared him for army life, because when they were in that American Revolutionary Army, they had very little money. They had very little to go on. They had to be like really like the first cowboys and camp and know how to set up a camp and how to survive in the wilderness. And all of that training as a surveyor and being accurate and knowing mathematics and completing his task, it all helped him. And that is why they made him the general of the American Revolutionary Army. Well, we will talk next week a little bit more about this, and I want to get into Abraham Lincoln, because these are men that there is a reason that a man is called a great man. They both went through a lot of difficult times in their lives, particularly Abraham Lincoln. You remember he lost his beautiful mother, but then he had a stepmother who came and she gave her all, and he attributed her character, kindness, and training to his greatness. So whenever in life we have an opportunity to help someone along or to be a good influence in their lives, don't take it lightly, because we do not know the power that our lives have on others of goodness and effect. And when we're with people sometimes we just feel there's a need here. Well, reach out and be sensitive and be kind and be encouraging to others, and you will make the world a better place. Particularly young people, they need a lot of encouragement and good words. They need good words. Find something good to say to them and encourage them on their way. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so special. And don't forget to have a cup of tea, and I hope that you had a nice Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is a day of giving and receiving, and it's important to remember that. And as we enter now and celebrate President's Day, let's talk about these great men to the people in our families, particularly the young people, to give them encouragement. Everyone needs mentors. Everyone needs models. Everyone needs someone to look up to, someone to inspire them. Abraham Lincoln and George Washington are truly two of those great men. Well, thank you for joining me. And I pray that you have an absolutely fabulous weekend. And it's a 3-day weekend, I believe, for most of us. And so enjoy and be creative. Reach out and bless others. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and push the notification bell and the share button and the like button if you like it. I will be so grateful. Thank you so much. And God bless. Have a fabulous week.